The security badge beeped red. Again. "Try it once more," Derek from IT muttered. Not looking up from his screen, red. The same badge that had opened every door in East-West Technologies for 18 years, the same badge I'd swiped this morning. At 7:30, like always, grabbing my usual coffee from the lobby machine before heading to my cubicle on the 3rd floor. "There's been a mistake, Charlie Martinez?" The voice behind me was crisp, unfamiliar. A woman in a navy suit, clipboard in hand, heels clicking against the marble floor. "I'm Jana from HR. We need to talk." My stomach dropped like an elevator with cut cables. The conference room, the prepared documents, the practice speech about cultural misalignment and fresh perspectives driving innovation. "Forward, Jeanette's voice became white noise as she slid the separation agreement across the mahogany table, her manicured fingers tapping against the wood. 18 years, I said, staring at the severance package. The numbers blurred together. I wrote half the policies in this building, every compliance framework, every safety protocol. "And we genuinely appreciate your contributions, Charlie. But leadership feels that fresh minds know better. The company's evolving rapidly, and sometimes that means making difficult personnel decisions. Fresh minds. I'd trained most of the fresh minds in this place, taught them compliance protocols, harassment procedures, intellectual property safeguards, contractor classifications, every policy document bearing my digital fingerprints, my careful research, my late-night revisions. This termination is effective. Immediately, security will escort you out within the hour. Your personal items will be boxed and shipped to your home address." The elevator ride down felt endless, each floor marker lighting up like a countdown to professional death. Security Tony, who I'd helped write the visitor management policy, for just last year avoided eye contact completely. The lobby buzzed with afternoon energy, people rushing between meetings, grabbing coffee, checking phones, living their busy corporate lives. Mine was over. Outside, the autumn air hit like a physical slap. Cars streamed past on the highway, everyone heading somewhere, with purpose, with destinations, with futures. I sat in my Honda, hands shaking uncontrollably, staring at the gleaming building where I'd spent most of my adult life constructing safeguards and protections. My phone buzzed. Text from my wife. "How was your day, honey?" How was my day? I'd just been discarded like outdated software, thrown away by people who didn't understand what I'd built. The kitchen table became my makeshift office for the next 3 weeks. Lisa would find me there at 2 in the morning, surrounded by printed emails, policy drafts, federal compliance documents, and legal frameworks I'd authored over nearly 2 decades of meticulous work. "You need to sleep," she'd say softly, but I couldn't. Every night, I relived the careful construction of East-West Technologies' entire operational backbone, remembering every late night, every sacrifice, every policy that had saved them millions. 2006, fresh MBA, 26 years old, eager to build something meaningful in the world. East-West was 12 people in a cramped office suite, dreams of lucrative government contracts dancing in everyone's heads. I wrote our first employee handbook on my personal laptop, staying until midnight to get the compliance framework exactly right, cross-referencing federal regulations until my eyes burned. 2009, the first major contract breakthrough. Suddenly we needed real HR infrastructure, professional policies, bulletproof procedures. I drafted everything from vacation policies to security clearance procedures to anti-discrimination frameworks. Weekends disappeared into research, cross-referencing federal regulations, ensuring every single clause protected both employees and company interests simultaneously. 2012, the expansion phase. New offices, new employees, new complexities. I created comprehensive onboarding procedures, intellectual property safeguards, contractor classification systems that could withstand any audit. My systematic approach to documentation became legendary. Other companies started asking for copies of our policies. 2014, IPO preparation hell. Corporate lawyers circled like vultures, scrutinizing every document, every procedure, every policy framework. But my work held strong. Every audit, every regulatory review, every compliance check we sailed through effortlessly. My systematic approach to documentation saved the company millions in potential liability and regulatory fines. The late nights hadn't bothered me then. Each policy felt like laying individual bricks in a magnificent cathedral of corporate protection. Lisa understood completely, even when I missed dinner parties and weekend family trips. "You're building something important," she'd say, rubbing my shoulders as I typed revisions at midnight. 2017, the harassment prevention overhaul. After watching competitors crumble under scandal, I proactively rewrote our entire framework, anticipating regulatory changes, weaving prevention deep into company culture before hashtags and movements made it trendy or required. 2019, the sexual harassment scandal that destroyed Meridian Corp completely. East-West's competitors scrambled desperately to update their inadequate policies, but ours were absolutely bulletproof. I'd anticipated the regulatory changes 3 years earlier, building protections that seemed excessive at the time, but proved prescient. My daughter Emma would do homework at my home office desk, while I refined anti-discrimination procedures. Her textbooks spread around my policy drafts. "Dad, why do you work so much?" she'd asked once. Maybe 10 years old, looking up from her math homework. "Because the details matter enormously. Sweetheart, when you do something right, people don't notice anything wrong. But when you do it wrong..." I gestured at news coverage of another company's spectacular public failure. She'd nodded seriously, returning to her mathematics. "All those nights, all those family sacrifices, all those missed dinners and weekend trips building an impenetrable fortress of policies that would protect East-West from every conceivable legal threat. And now some fresh mind would inherit my life's work, probably without understanding why each carefully crafted clause existed." I opened my laptop and began typing methodically. The consulting work came naturally after words spread through professional networks. Smaller firms desperately needed policy development, and my reputation preceded me everywhere. But while I helped them build their compliance frameworks, I kept watching East-West carefully through various channels. LinkedIn became my primary intelligence network. Former colleagues posted regular updates, job changes, company announcements, policy revisions. I noticed things others missed: the subtle shifts in corporate language, the conspicuous absence of certain crucial policies from their updated employee handbook. Thompson, the new chief people officer, had enthusiastically modernized everything possible. Streamlined was his absolute favorite buzzword. Gone were my carefully crafted anti-discrimination procedures, replaced with generic legal templates downloaded from corporate websites. The intellectual property safeguards I'd spent 5 years perfecting through legal research, condensed to a single inadequate paragraph: efficiency over bureaucracy. Thompson had announced in a company-wide email that someone helpfully forwarded to me. I began documenting the changes methodically, obsessively. Screenshots of policy updates, archived versions of critical documents, precise timestamps of when crucial protections disappeared. Not for any specific immediate purpose, just because attention to details had always mattered fundamentally. My consulting clients genuinely appreciated such thoroughness. "You think of absolutely everything," said Miranda, CEO of a defense contractor. "It's like you've personally seen every possible way things can go catastrophically wrong." I had indeed. That's exactly why my policies at East-West had been so comprehensive, so detailed, so seemingly excessive. During a coffee meeting with David, a former East-West project manager, I learned about the dramatic cultural shifts happening internally. "It's all about agility now," he explained enthusiastically. "Less documentation, more interpersonal trust. Thompson says your old policies were definite innovation killers." I nodded sympathetically, agreeing that change was sometimes necessary for growth. But privately, I wondered how long their agile approach would survive direct contact with regulatory reality. In my extensive experience, federal regulations didn't care about innovation velocity. Employment lawsuits didn't respect streamlined processes or corporate buzzwords. The email arrived on a Tuesday morning. Rebecca, still working in East-West's legal department, reaching out for informal advice, unofficial consultation. She called it carefully. Some employment practices questions, nothing urgent or alarming. I suggested coffee immediately. She looked absolutely exhausted, dark circles under her eyes. "Charlie, we've got complex situations developing rapidly. Thompson's new policies. There are significant gaps, dangerous ones." I listened carefully, asking precise questions, methodically understanding the current landscape. When she left looking slightly relieved, I sat in the coffee shop for another hour, mind churning through possibilities. The fortress I'd carefully built was crumbling systematically, and I was the only person who knew exactly where the cracks would appear first. The anonymous tip to the Department of Labor was surgically precise, just enough specific detail to trigger a formal investigation into East-West's overtime policies that Thompson had streamlined by removing the specific protections I'd built for contractor classifications and wage calculations. I sent it on a Friday afternoon, knowing the DOL would follow up the following week with official inquiries. Then I waited patiently. The call came Tuesday morning. Rebecca, voice tight with obvious stress. "Charlie, we desperately need your help. The DOL is asking detailed questions about contractor compliance, and we can't find the documentation for our classification protocols anywhere. That's genuinely concerning," I said carefully. "What specifically are they asking about?" 3 hours later, I was walking through East-West's lobby as a contracted consultant, temporary badge clipped to my shirt. The irony wasn't lost on me 6 months ago. They'd escorted me out like a criminal. Now they were paying my premium consulting rate to fix problems they'd created by systematically dismantling my work. Thompson looked considerably older. Stress had carved deep lines around his eyes, and his previously confident smile seemed forced, artificial. "Charlie, we genuinely appreciate you coming back to help us. This is just a routine audit, but we want to be absolutely thorough." I nodded, professionally, already knowing exactly what the DOL would discover. While reviewing their current inadequate policies, I noticed other significant vulnerabilities Thompson's team had inadvertently created. The intellectual property agreements now had exploitable loopholes any competent lawyer could drive trucks through. The harassment reporting procedures lacked the specific language that had protected the company during previous investigations. "These changes are quite interesting," I mentioned casually to Rebecca during our policy review. "Very streamlined." Indeed, Thompson wanted to modernize everything completely, make it more accessible to employees, less intimidating. "Accessibility is certainly important," I agreed, making careful notes. That evening, I drafted 3 additional anonymous tips with surgical precision. One to the EEOC about potential discrimination in their new hiring practices that lacked proper safeguards. Another to the State Labor Board about break time policies that no longer met basic regulatory requirements. The third to a specialized employment law firm about the intellectual property vulnerabilities that could cost millions. Each tip was completely factual, thoroughly researched, and precisely targeted at the gaps Thompson's fresh thinking had systematically created. I wasn't fabricating problems, I was simply highlighting the natural consequences of dismantling careful safeguards built over decades. By Thursday morning, East-West had 3 active federal investigations and law firms circling like sharks. Thompson called me personally, voice strained. "Charlie, we need to expand your consulting agreement immediately. The situation has gotten extremely complex." "I understand completely," I said, calculating my increased hourly rate. "Compliance issues can escalate very quickly when the foundational policies aren't sufficiently robust. Can you come in tomorrow? We desperately need someone who understands our complete history, someone who understood their history, someone who had actually written their entire history." "Of course," I said calmly. "I'll clear my schedule completely." The meeting room filled with panic as I presented my preliminary assessment. "The exposure is significant," I explained methodically. "Multiple regulatory frameworks have been compromised." Thompson's hands shook as he reviewed my documentation. "How long to fix this?" he asked desperately. "Months," I replied. "Maybe longer, depending on regulatory response and litigation timing." The law firm's letter arrived on Monday like a controlled detonation. Class action lawsuit. 47 employees claiming systematic misclassification and unpaid overtime violations. The exact catastrophic scenario my original policies had been specifically designed to prevent. I sat in the emergency leadership meeting, watching Thompson's confident facade crumble in real time like a house of cards. How did they get so much detailed documentation? He asked the legal team desperately. Someone provided them with comprehensive analysis of our policy changes. The lead attorney replied grimly. Whoever tipped them off knows our systems intimately. Round the mahogany table, executives exchanged suspicious glances, paranoia spreading. I maintained neutral professionalism, taking detailed notes, asking relevant questions about liability, exposure and potential damages. The damages could easily reach 8 figures. Another lawyer said soberly, and that's just the first wave of litigation. The EEOC investigation had uncovered systematic issues with their hiring practices. Without my carefully crafted anti-discrimination procedures, they'd inadvertently created patterns that looked intentionally biased to federal investigators. 3 more specialized law firms had joined the feeding frenzy. Charlie, Thompson said, voice strained with desperation, your original policies, do we still have complete copies? I'm sure they're archived somewhere in the system, I replied calmly, though implementing them now might be legally complicated, given the ongoing litigation. By Wednesday, the local business journal had picked up the story. East-West Technologies faces multiple federal investigations. The article mentioned dramatic policy changes and former employees questioning new practices. Prominently, Thompson called an emergency all-hands meeting. Standing before 300 employees, many of whom I'd protected with my meticulous policies for years, he announced temporary consulting arrangements to address regulatory compliance challenges. I watched from the back, invisible in my consultant role, as the empire I'd built and they'd dismantled burned spectacularly around them. The stock price dropped 18% into trading days. Thursday brought the sexual harassment complaint. A former employee, armed with detailed knowledge of East-West's weakened reporting procedures, filed claims that would have been impossible under my original framework. The new policies Thompson had implemented lacked the specific protections and response protocols I'd spent years perfecting through legal research. This is a complete nightmare, Rebecca said during our coffee meeting, hands shaking. Everything's falling apart simultaneously. These things often cluster together. I observed clinically. Once word gets out that a company has compliance vulnerabilities, it attracts predatory attention. Friday's emergency board meeting lasted 6 grueling hours. Through my network of former colleagues, I learned that Thompson had been placed on administrative leave pending investigation. The board was considering bringing in crisis management consultants. They're talking about reinstating all your old policies immediately, David texted me. Thompson's fresh thinking just cost them their biggest government contract. I responded with a simple acknowledgement, then opened my laptop to review the crisis management proposal I'd been drafting. East-West would need comprehensive policy, reconstruction, litigation support, and ongoing regulatory compliance consulting. At my significantly increased hourly rate, naturally, the weekend brought more bad news. 2 major clients had terminated contracts, citing compliance concerns. The government contract suspension would cost them tens of millions in revenue. Monday morning, I received the call I'd been expecting. Charlie, this is the board chairman. We need to talk. The settlement checks cleared on a Tuesday morning in March, 8 figures. Exactly as I'd predicted months earlier. East-West Technologies agreed to comprehensive policy overhaul, mandatory compliance training, ongoing external monitoring, and significant financial penalties. I signed the primary consulting contract that afternoon, sitting in the same conference room where Jana had handed me my severance agreement. The irony felt like perfect justice finally served. We're genuinely grateful you're willing to help us through this transition, the interim CEO said carefully. Different face, same mahogany table, but the power dynamics had shifted completely and permanently. It's important work that needs to be done correctly, I replied, reviewing the comprehensive scope of services. Complete policy reconstruction, from the ground up. Every protection I'd originally built, plus new safeguards to address the vulnerabilities that had been so successfully exploited. Townsend's fresh thinking had cost East West $43 million in settlements, legal fees, and lost contracts. The board had paid out his contract quietly, probably hoping he'd disappear without attracting more attention to their failures. My new office was corner suite, 2 floors up from my old cramped cubicle. The view overlooked the parking lot where I'd sat in my Honda 8 months earlier, hands shaking with rage and disbelief at my sudden termination. "Dad, your new office is really nice," Emma said, visiting during spring break, 17 now, applying to colleges, thinking seriously about her future career. "It's temporary," I said carefully, "just until they get their systems completely rebuilt." But the consulting contract was open-ended, renewable annually with performance bonuses. East West needed someone who understood compliance not as bureaucratic burden, but as strategic protection. Someone who'd seen firsthand what happened when careful safeguards were dismantled. For the sake of efficiency, Lisa brought dinner to the office one evening as I worked on the new intellectual property framework. "You seem different," she said, unpacking Thai food on my desk carefully. "How so?" "Calmer. More focused, like you're doing exactly what you're supposed to be doing with your life." I considered this carefully, watching her range containers of pad thai and green curry. For 18 years, I'd built policies to protect East West from theoretical risks. Now I was rebuilding them to prevent very real, very expensive mistakes that had already cost them millions. "Maybe I am," I said thoughtfully. The phone rang. Another former colleague, calling from a different company, asking if I had time for a substantial consulting project. Word was spreading rapidly through the industry about East West's spectacular policy failures and their ongoing expensive recovery. My calendar was filling with clients who suddenly understood the genuine value of comprehensive compliance frameworks, companies that had watched East West's collapse and realized their own streamlined policies might have similar dangerous vulnerabilities. I quoted my hourly rate considerably higher than my old salary and scheduled the initial consultation. Outside my office window, employees were leaving for the day, heading home to families and evening plans. Normal people with normal jobs, protected by policies they'd never see or think about consciously. That was exactly how it should be. When you do something right, people don't notice anything wrong. But when you do it wrong, well, they'd certainly noticed East West's catastrophic mistakes. I opened my laptop and began drafting the comprehensive compliance manual that would keep that from happening again. The details mattered. They always had mattered. And now, finally, everyone understood exactly why.